Cool. Right. So what I want to cover is something called forces of irrationality. So pretty much it's gonna we're gonna discuss a couple of things. It's really important. It's like a theory, psychological based training that I've made that's based on like how to think, how to make the right decisions, biases, like a bunch of different things that I think is really fundamental and important for everyone in you. And I'm going to use it in the sense of like client acquisition in this, but you can apply this to anything, right? So you can apply this to content, to traffic. And this is like this is a big reason, like it might not seem super important, but this is probably one of the most important things that I see why people fail. And it's kind of simple, but like no one really realizes it because it's kind of unconscious. And people, until you make the unconscious conscious, then like Carl Jung says, it will rule your life and you will call it fate, right? And so the point of this training that I've made is to really come to terms with making the unconscious conscious. There's a couple of action steps I'll need you guys to take during this session as well. And I'll drop those action steps in the chat as we get to them. But yeah, the point of this is just to really like explain forces of irrationality, right? So we're going to discuss the discipline of rationality and reason, and we're going to talk about like unconscious psychological forces that prevent you from achieving success with content, with client acquisition, with the overall business in general. And the thing is, these forces make you more likely to take action that directly or indirectly stops you from getting clients, right? And so you need to be aware of them. And like Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate, right? So I'm going to pull this doc up and let me just admit this before we start. I'm going to pull this doc up and I'm going to go over this. Give me a sec. Why is this not sharing? Cool. Right, perfect. So the first thing is the decision sum, right? So understand where you are right now with the client acquisition state is simply the result of all the decisions you've ever made to do with client acquisition. And again, like I said, I'm going to use client acquisition as the example, but you can apply this to anything. You can apply it to content. You can apply it to pretty much anything in your business, right? So understand where you are right now with your exact, where you are now with the client acquisition state is simply the result of all the decisions you've ever made to do with client acquisition. If the quality of your decision-making ability is good, you're more likely to succeed, right? It's not rocket science. And so most people don't know how to make decisions because they've never been taught how. And so the easiest way to improve your decision-making ability is not to try and make good decisions. It's just trying not to make bad ones, right? And I learned this from Sam Ellens. And when I went to Vegas, like he said, look, as long as I'm right, like 60-70% of the time and I like avoid making bad decisions, then I'm good. And like Sam Ellens leaves most of his decisions up to a spin wheel because he doesn't want to put the conscious effort into conscious energy into actually making those decisions, right? So there are 7 forces you have in your psyche that, if not addressed, will lead you to making poor decisions around client acquisition, around content. And if we address these, we can become more rational, right? So reason and rationality. Reason just means the power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments logically. And rationality is the quality of being based on or in accordance with reason or logic. If you're rational and reason well, you'll be right and make the right decision more often. A decision is right when making it leads to an action that helps us achieve the goal. The first step towards rationality is awareness, and that's what this is for, right? So how do we become rational and able to reason better? Well, it's inversion. We simply focus on how not to be irrational or reason poorly. And so if you don't make the wrong decision, you will make the right one. So we've got 7 forces of irrationality, and the first one is bias, right? And so bias means, you probably all know what bias means: lean towards or have predisposed inclination towards something or away from something. And bias is like a magnet, an attractor. And if you have a bias towards something, you will attract and experience more of that thing. If you have a bias against something, you will repel and reduce experience of that thing. And so a bias has a psychological gravitational pull, just like you can see here, right? And so the rule is, you can't develop a bias for something without developing a bias against something else, because biases are polarizing by nature, right? And so for example, I've got potentially a bias around Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, right? Like, I don't really know a lot about politics, so I'm not exactly the best person to make an informed decision, but I just relate with Trump more because of his story, because he's a business guy, and so I just think Trump would be better. And I've got a bias against Joe Biden because I think, he's just a shitty person, but I've not actually, like, rationally looked at it. I'm just biased towards Trump being better. Therefore, I have to be then biased against Joe Biden being shit, right? And so that's like a bias that I have. And so biases are polarizing by nature because the rule is you can't develop a bias for something without developing a bias against something else, right? So we've got this principle called mental inertia. And what it means is if a human is biased towards something, their psychology will continue to evolve in that direction. The stronger the bias becomes, the more of something the bias attracts or repels, meaning the stronger the bias becomes, you just have this feedback loop, right? You just constantly, it's like your reticular activating system is constantly looking for things to back up that bias, right? And that's with everything in life. That's when it comes to, whole mindset, mental models that we have from our parents when we were younger, or, maybe poor experiences from buying programs or poor experiences from client acquisition. Like, we're constantly then looking to back that bias up, right? And so why a bias is a problem? A bias polarizes you towards a certain way of doing something until the only way you can do that thing is the way the bias is set. When it's time to adapt or change, someone with a bias will struggle or reject the change as it's just not me, right? And you probably see this with like your parents and your grandparents more than anything. It's like, like there's no actual real logical reason for it. Like, I was having a conversation with my nan the other day, trying to get her to like eat better. And she just had all these like bullshit barriers of like, oh no, I can't, it's just not me, and blah, blah, blah. And there was no real reason for it other than, she's lived her whole life saying that she is this certain way. And our bias has looked to back that up. So now she has such a strong bias for that particular situation that it's really, really almost impossible to get it to change, right? And as mentioned you, when it's time to adapt or change, even if it's for the better and for the benefit of you, someone with a bias will struggle or reject the change as not them, right? So if you're biased to think, oh, Dylan is the best in the industry when it comes to client acquisition, you will attract more information and experiences to confirm that, right? Whereas if you think the opposite and you're like, oh, Dylan's like, fake guru and he's really bad at client acquisition, he has no idea what he's talking about. Well, then everything you're going to do in this program, you're going to look for that, right? And that's what you will find because you will attract that, right? Even though it's not actual fact or it's not actual rational or logical, right? That's where you will try and find. So an example, I once had a client who was biased towards not seeming spammy. She was biased to think that all cold DMs, regardless of the quality of them, were going to be seen as spam. This led to her being irrational and making decisions that were not conducive to client acquisition. Even after I explained that she purchased from us after receiving the same cold DM, she still insisted on it being spam and that it was against her way of doing things. Another example is I was talking to a salesperson who was biased towards the idea that if someone wants to think about it, they're never going to buy on the call. His bias stated that if someone wanted to think, they weren't properly qualified, and to push them would be a mistake. Because of this bias, he didn't make an effort to handle objections when the situation arose. Even when I told him to try, he didn't try very hard because of his bias. So just literally he didn't try hard because he just was trying to confirm his own bias, right? Another example is I was reviewing a piece of content from a client who was biased towards short form content, and he was biased to think that people wouldn't respond to long form content and that shorter videos equals more conversion and more reach. And I corrected him by showing him data from our long form content on YouTube, but he rejected the data and started trying to reconfirm his bias, saying, but yeah, that's because your model's this or that, or because she's good on camera, blah, 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 blah. He had no evidence to support his bias. In fact, the opposite, because his short form content also wasn't working. But it was so unconsciously strong that he refused to part ways with it. Another example is we took on a closer who was biased towards maintaining a deluded self-image of being good at sales. He blamed everything under the sun for why his calls wouldn't close, as his bias was, I'm good at sales. This one manifests heavily in people who have a lot of experience. Over time, we corrected the bias, but it took some doing. Another example is when I started building client acquisition systems, I was biased to believe it would work with enough iteration and scientific testing. Because of this, when the systems didn't perform, I was biased to think that I just needed to run more tests, right? And so biases can be a force for good or for bad. When it comes to client acquisition, if you're biased to think your systems will work, you're more likely to get results. If you think they won't, but only if you caveat your positive bias with something so you don't become deluded, right? And so an action step that I'm going to drop in the chat that you guys can do after this call is to list 10 biases that you have that are negatively affecting your ability to acquire clients or create content. You can come up with your own versions, but like this is really important because again, if we go to the start, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate, right? And so it's really important that you actually do that. Now, the next force of irrationality is emotion, right? So emotion is the number one enemy of client acquisition. It's the reason why most people fail. And here is the issue. And like I said, I'm just using client acquisition as the example in this, but like you can tailor this to anything, like content creation, business in general, right? And so emotion is the number one enemy of client acquisition. It's the reason most people fail. So here's the issue. You have your current situation in business in the now, and you have a goal, which is your desired situation in business, which is the future. Both of your states, the now and the future, create strong emotions. So, for example, the now would be like, pain, desperation, suffering, unhappiness, fear, anxiety, panic, sadness, hate. Whereas the future state would be pleasure, freedom, joy, happiness, confidence, love, or over the moonness, right? And so to bridge the gap between now and later, you need to solve the problem of client acquisition, right? And so what? Your entire emotional condition and technically life hinges on client acquisition. Because obviously, if you don't solve client acquisition, then you can never actually have a thriving business, right? If you haven't got a consistent stream of clients coming in, you're never gonna actually be able to like scale effectively. And you're never actually going to be able to build a business that creates this future state, right? Because you're always having feast and famine with your client acquisition, which is why it's like the biggest problem that no one really thinks it is. Like everyone thinks the problem is like so many different things, but like I know for a fact that client acquisition is the biggest thing, and it's like that's that whole thing of like making the unconscious conscious, right? Like if you could just have your way with whatever client that you want to sign. If you could book 5 calls a day and just go through as many clients as you wanted to find the high quality ones, then a lot of the other stuff would be so much easier. Like you can fix a lot of issues in your business just by having higher quality, better clients, right? And so like that's why I put a lot of effort into the client acquisition stuff. So to bridge the gap between now and later, you need to solve the problem with client acquisition. So what? Your entire emotional condition and technically life hinges on client acquisition. This means emotionally, you're extremely sensitive to things that happen to or in your client acquisition systems and processes. Entrepreneurs that are trying to grow are more emotionally sensitive to client acquisition than almost anything else in their business. And it's because of this they find it so hard. The more emotionally sensitive you are to client acquisition, the more irrational you're going to be. That's the more mistakes you're going to make. In evolutionary acquisition theory, which is the module that I last created, so for those of you that have seen that, this will make sense. So in that module, we recall that the scientific method is the only way to achieve success in client acquisition. And this requires testing, patience, and emotional control. And you can build 2 types of client acquisition systems, right? Which is successful, so built with slow, methodical, logical, thoughtful, deliberate change, or a failing client acquisition system, which is built with erratic, impulsive, illogical, sudden, chaotic, and accidental change. The only difference between 1 and 2 is that person 1 operates with rationality, not emotion, because you must learn to control your emotions and do the following when a hypothesis fails. So you have to sit with and face the distress and emotions created by your now state and resist the temptation of the pleasurable emotions created by your future state. So why are emotions a force of irrationality? Why are they a problem? Understand that emotions are not the problem. It's what they encourage that is the problem. So emotion originates from the word mover in Latin, which means to move, right? So emotions encourage movement, in other words, action. And almost all actions cloud your judgment and encourage us to make decisions and therefore take actions that aren't right. So positive emotions are just as destructive as negative ones if not controlled. So common emotions that interfere with client acquisition are, this is not a definitive list, but anger, fear, confidence, surprise, sadness, happiness, joy, excitement, hopelessness, anxious, panic, stress, bitter, insulted, frustrated, delighted, bored, annoyed, envious, etc., right? And so the 2 rules for this is never make a decision around client acquisition when an emotion is present. And this is true for all aspects of your business. Like you never want to make any decision, whether it's a sales decision, whether it's a content decision, like you never want to make a decision around any of those systems in your business when an emotion's present, especially a strong one. The stronger it is, the longer you need to wait, right? And so everyone's lacking patience these days. So always make changes for your client acquisition systems based on data, not on emotion. It does not matter how you feel or hope or how you think it should go or whatever it is, right? Wherever your biases is, it does not matter. You should always make decisions based on data. And I can probably say that every single person in this call has definitely made decisions not based on data, including myself, right? Especially when you're an up and coming beginner business owner, you're making less than 100 grand a month, 50 grand a month. You can sort of get away with it sometimes and get lucky by just like making these random decisions. But like to scale effectively and sustainably, like you always should make changes based on data, right? And like we talked about in the acquisition modules, the better the data you have, the better the decision you can make, right? The bigger the sample size, the better the decisions you can make, right? Which is why you need to give it time, and you need to actually account for the latency of a system, right? So like this is why with content, like no one really knows what content's going to work, right? Like we have 25, 30 proven universal verticals, and we'll give this blueprint to our creators, and we have no idea for like 6 weeks which ones are going to work for them, right? And so like let's just say we pick 5 and we test those 5 over 6 weeks. Like after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks of nothing happening, we could get emotional and just make tons of changes. But instead we stick it out for 6 weeks because that's the period of like latency that makes sense. And based on that 6 weeks, we can then decide after 6 weeks, even if ours gone tits up and we haven't got any results, we can now actually have accurate data and a big enough sample size to be like, okay, let's make this change, right? And even when we're changing, we're not changing every fucking single thing, right? We're just changing one thing at a time, because otherwise, if something does start working and we make tons of changes at once, we now have no idea which change made that thing work, right? Which is why you need patience. Like, because once you find the thing that works, you can milk it. Like you can just go so great. Like I would rather spend 6 months trying to make a system work, like a client acquisition system or a content system, or like I would rather spend 6 months of failing and like just changing one variable at a time to then find something that works, so I can then milk it and go from 10K to 200K in 2 months, than like constantly be like ups and downs and changing everything and not knowing why anything goes this specific way and just doing the scientific method, right? So you need to learn to watch and observe your emotions. You can do this via meditation, 20 minutes every day, just literally watching your breath. It's literally made me a ton of money, right? Literally just doing this every single day. Example, I was making 40K a month in my agency, and so compared to making 100K a month, I got envious and mad and had one of our models book a call with them to listen to their systems to try and copy them, where my own systems were in KPI and would have got me to 100K a month in 4 to 6 months if I had just waited. I had later realized this, and they did. Lol. And another one, and another example of this is one of my clients was panicking on a coaching call because he hadn't received any replies from his DMs in the last 4 days, and he usually received 1 to 2 a day. He was stressed and had blown the whole thing out of proportion and started proposing changes to the system and offer. I told him that we need to let regression to the mean do his thing. A few hours after the coaching call, he got 3 replies, like legit, no joke. When starting one of the first cold DMs, when I was starting my agency, one of the first cold DMs I sent received an extremely negative response. And I got angry, sad, confused, and panicked, and stopped sending cold DMs, changing my entire outreach message, and taking 2 weeks to pluck the courage up to send one again, and never change the system, never change the entire system based on the opinion of a select few, right? Really important. So another force of rationality, the next one is the third force, which is belief, right? So the main bottleneck that entrepreneurs face don't actually exist in their business. They exist in their mind first as beliefs, and then they manifest in their business, right? And you've heard me talk about this a lot, and it's really true. Like, it's never actually a business problem. Like, it's always a personal problem that is manifesting in your business. And this isn't some like hippie woo-woo shit. Like, this is like actual like real talk, right? And so it's extremely likely that you have limiting beliefs in your head to do with client acquisition, or to do with content, or to do with sales. It doesn't matter, right? You probably have limiting beliefs in your head to do with them. And so beliefs restrict, constrain, and limit you. Human beings can do pretty much anything as long as it's within the laws of nature and physics, and within the comprehension of their belief system. If you had a negative experience with client acquisition, I guarantee you have limiting negative beliefs to do with it. Same with content, same with sales. If you first have a sales call, or you first have a 3 sales call, which is really bad, you probably have a really negative limiting belief and experience when it comes to sales calls. If your first 3 models left you because you couldn't generate any results through organic content, and you probably have a really negative experience with organic content, and it could have just been the models, or it could have just been that you wasn't as experienced, but because your bias is there, you never actually grow, and you never actually want to do that again, and so you look for all these other things, and that's why stuff doesn't end up working for you, because you can't stick with something for long enough, right? And so a belief is a perceived statement of truth about something or the way the world works. And I've got a PDF which I've already talked about. It's in the program, so I'm not going to go over it now because it'll just take too much time. But there is a section in the program called the Outreach Epiphany, where I talk about the outreach epiphany I had, and that's really solid. And I've mentioned it. I think everyone in you has probably seen it, watched it, or been on the call with me when I did this live. So the next thing I need you guys to do is to write out, list out everything you believe to be true about client acquisition, and do this for content as well. Do this for sales. Do this for every aspect of the business. Like, list out everything you believe to be true. And that way you can find like be completely real with yourself. Like, you don't have to dig deep in like your subconscious. But like, if you generally believe like acquisition is hard, then like you go and watch the Outreach Epiphany, right? Once you've done this, go and watch the Outreach Epiphany, or go and watch the Outreach Epiphany first if you haven't, or if you want a refresher, go and watch that first. And then you can list out everything, right? It's in the program, it's in the acquisition section. It's a really, really solid video. I think it's literally in the first part of Elixir of Acquisition, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, list out everything you believe to be true about client acquisition, and do it for all other aspects. And then you're going to start to realize, like, oh shit, like I think that like these girls are this way, and that's not actually true. I think that this is hard, and well, that's not actually real, because well, it can't be hard if this person's having success and this person's having success. So it's just my belief around it, right? It's just my bias towards it. And so like, I want you guys to start challenging your beliefs about everything, right? And that's something you should always do. Like, before you make statements, always challenge that belief. Is like, is that true? And this is where the next part gets into it, which is why a lot of people never challenge their own beliefs, is because of ego, right? And so this is forceful. And in client acquisition, in business, in a lot of things, ego is the enemy, right? And now ego is good. I never say to people to kill your ego completely, because your ego can protect you from a lot of different things. And the ego is there for a reason. But a lot of the time in business, ego is the enemy, and especially in client acquisition. And so rule is never take anything personally when it comes to client acquisition, right? In client acquisition, you are going to be dealing with people. Some people aren't very nice, and they can do weird, unexplainable things that might upset, offend, anger, or annoy you. It pays incredible dividends to never take anything personally when trying to build a business. The best way to win an argument is to avoid one. If you don't need to argue, detach your ego and remove yourself from the conversation. Why is there a problem? Well, ego is a problem because we're in business to solve people's problems and make money. And when dealing with people who want to become clients, that should be our focus. The second the sales conversation or DM chain diverts from these focuses and onto protecting and defending the ego, the opportunity is dead in the water. It doesn't matter how intolerable or offensive a prospect may seem, it's imperative you stand your frame and do not stoop to their level. So I realized this, right? Something was happening in my agency, in my organization, where like one of our key members, like who's been on the team for like 3 years, and was like, you know, conducting a lot of like outreach for models in like the first. It was just a nightmare, right? He was conducting a lot of outreach for models, and pretty much what was happening is he was getting like a lot of negative responses, and he was laying that like I was with him one day, because I was with him in person. And like some girl had said something, like it was kind of like really crazy, to be honest, but she said something and it really got to him, and he was like, fuck this bitch, like all these girls are the same, like blah 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 blah, they're just slags. And he was like really going crazy, and I was sat there like, holy shit, like this isn't just a one-time thing. Like, I know from psychology, like this is a belief. This is why he's not performing as well. It's because he's probably had a bunch of negative responses, and he's really letting it get to him. And now he's putting it out there. He's projecting that this is how all models are. All models are entitled. All models are this way. And like those beliefs were really holding him back and holding back the organization. I just pulled him aside and I was like, bro, like you need to sort this shit out. I sat there and just challenged his beliefs with him. And it was really difficult. And after that, you sort of understood. But it took a long time. It wasn't just like one conversation that fixed it. Like I would call him out on it multiple times if I'd ever hear him talking like about these models in that specific way, like super derogatory and like it can go even deeper than that, right? Like it can go deep, like in that scenario, it can go deeper to like, okay, maybe he's been rejected when he was younger and when he went for this girl and this and that. And so like he's got like this almost red pill stance of like all these females are hoes and this and that, when that's not actually true, right? That's just like what he's exposed to. And so that's why like I hate all this red pill shit, because like all these red pill guys, don't get me wrong, there's good things from like red pill that you can take, but some people just go way too far with it. And like some people, because they believe the few things, they never think objectively about it and be like, oh, that's a good belief. I can take that and like I can benefit from that. Oh, this is a real objective truth. I can take that. Or that's actually like a psychological fact. I can take that. Instead, they start going way too far and they almost delude themselves into being like this like Myron and Fresh and Fit and all these types of people. Like they're just too far into it to where it's like everything's this way, everything's this way. And like the world's non-binary, like it's not like black and white, right? But a lot of the rap guys, it's like it's black and white. Every girl's this way, every girl's this way, every OnlyFans creator thinks like this, but it's not the objective truth, right? And so that was a little tangent, but like that was a really big thing. And this might the reason I say that is because I feel like it will relate. Maybe that's you right now in this call, or maybe that's your business partner that sees these career. That's the biggest blocker for anyone I see in this industry, is if they're doing it to get back at women, or if they're doing it because they feel like they're more powerful than women, or if they're doing it because they've like got these red pill views and they want to be cool and all this sort of stuff. A lot of the time that will hold you back, because you actually have subconscious negative beliefs about the people that you're trying to help. And so how can you help someone if like subconsciously you don't want to help them and you don't even like these types of people, right? And so you either challenge those beliefs and realize they're not true, and then you go and start helping people, or you do go to a different industry because you're never going to succeed, right? And so that's a really, really, really big one. And so some other examples is I was once on a call with a DM set who wasn't performing, and I had to let him go. And he was extremely rude on the call to me. And this setter role, it's very professional. I lay it out from the very get-go. This is what the compensation is. It's a complete pay on results role. So like, you're going to get 7.5% commission who like call that closes, or there's been it changes. We do $20 per book call now, and so it's like, right, it's $20 per book call, for example, and this guy didn't book any calls and it'd been like a month, and he was demanding that he pays him, and he was demanding that like it's illegal to not pay him, even though he knew exactly what this role was and he just hadn't performed. And he was calling me a scammer, and he was just going crazy. And I was like, holy shit, this guy's an actual psychopath. Like I just couldn't get my head around it. I explained it all to him. I like showed him the onboarding call that we did with him. Like I showed him all the stuff he's already watched, which clearly state. I showed him his contract. I pulled up everything, all the evidence to just show he was completely delusional, and he was still going crazy. And so then I started to get offended, and like I started like firing back with some really like snarky comments about some stuff he'd said. And that was a really big mistake, because we literally argued on that call for like 5 minutes before I was like, nah, enough's enough. I left the call. I took that offended energy into the rest of my day. The rest of the day was just shit because of it. And I found out later that day that guy DM'd like my entire SETA team, telling them I was a scammer, that I should not be trusted. And like they were all then messaging me, and it was just a fucking nightmare. And I had to like then spend hours like meshing my status, like, no, look, this is what it is, like blah, 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 blah. And then they all obviously realize, oh, okay, this guy's a psychopath. But like the point is, if you win in the argument, you lose in business, right? And so this is why ego is such a fucking like just a bastard in business, right? Now, another example is one of my clients was tagged in a post by this was a long time ago, but one of our first ever clients was tagged in a post by a OnlyFans creator that was really like annoyed with the service that she had, right? And she tagged him in a post on Instagram, made a video, and my client had like drafted a massive response to put in the comments, and it was quite aggressive. And I told him not to comment anything, and he's glad he did, because it just blew over, and nothing really came of it. But if he had done that, it just would have sparked fuel to the fire, right? Because again, like If you win in the argument, you lose in business, right? And so TikTok comments is another example. They used to offend me like quite badly until I realized like they're just words from useless people with nothing better to do with their lives than personally insult others to make themselves feel good, right? They're just projecting. Until I realized that I used to let certain comments get to me and that would affect how I would do stuff and this and that, right? And that's really bad. So also don't do things how you want to do them based on best practices. Accept that if you're new to something, your way won't be the right or best way. So that is ego, right? Which is one of the biggest forces of irrationality. Now, number 5 out of 7 is resistance. Now, resistance is an internal sensation that prevents you from taking action on client acquisition or content, on wherever it is you're trying to do, wherever the task at hand is. Resistance is an internal sensation that prevents you from doing that task. It's an emotion you feel or sensation you experience when you sit down to work but can't. Resistance is an enemy to client acquisition and operates within 7 principles. Principle 1, there's an enemy working against you. Resistance is intelligent, malevolent, and nasty. Principle 2, the enemy is relentless. It aims to kill your desired reality and quash all your hopes and dreams. Principle 3, the enemy is produced by a fragment of you. It's inside you and it comes from you. Principle 4, you are not the enemy. It's a force of nature produced by you, but you can't help it, just like a pulse. Principle 5, you must duel yourself. You are a knight and the dragon. War is inevitable. The knight must win. Principle 6, goals come first. Resistance comes second. They cannot be a shadow with an object and the sun. Principle 7 is resistance can be overcome with pain, love, and assistance. The opposite of resistance is beatable, right? So resistance as a force takes many different forms. And there are 30 forms of resistance that I've defined, and I guarantee plenty of them manifest in you when you sit down to do the work, right? Fear is by far the most common one. Not working because you're afraid of what happens if you do. Instant gratification, massive nowadays. Not working because you want or expect instant results, instant gratification. Doubt, not working because you have doubts about yourself or that it's even possible. Anxiety, not working because it makes you feel nervous, anxious, or uncomfortable. Rationalization, not working because you rationalize not to do it. A lot of people do this, like, I didn't think I should do this because I thought I would do this instead and blah, blah, blah. And they're just like putting off the hard shit they don't want to do, right? Like, especially when it comes to scientific method and testing systems, a lot of people rationalize, oh, I don't need to do the scientific method. Like, I don't need to come up with a hypothesis. I don't need to like worry about any of that stuff. I'll just like make changes based on where I feel because it's easier. And then they never get anywhere, right? And it's because you're rationalizing not to do it. Learning, not working because you want to learn more about it first. This is a big one that, like, you know, most of you guys in you probably not face this, but a lot of real beginners, like they just want to learn before they actually do it. But the biggest learnings actually come from doing it and failing, right? So research, not working because you want to do some more research first, right? Now it's good to do research, but there's also levels of doing too much, right? Comfort, not working because you feel comfortable right now. This is a big one for me, and I still deal with this like every now and again. I'll still see this. Like, I'll look at the number in the bank and I'm like, oh, I'm fucking good. Like, I don't even need to do this. And then I'm like, no, like, let me get back on purpose. Like, this is not where I'm doing it, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't happen to me as much anymore, but I had a real comfort was the enemy for a long time, especially when it comes to like fitness and stuff for me as well. Like, I've just started getting back into fitness and going for runs and training and eating well. Like I've eaten well anyway, but like getting back into that sort of stuff. And it's because I was just comfortable where I was at. Like I didn't realize I needed it, but comfort's the enemy. So I'm always trying to seek discomfort, right? To break this. Now, perfection is another one, not working because you want everything to be perfect before starting. There's no such thing as perfect conditions before starting, right? Waiting, not working because you would rather wait to see if things change, also really terrible. Justifying, not working because you've justified it. Woke priority, not working because you think you should be working on something else. That's why it's super important to prioritize. All the best entrepreneurs I've ever met, they are killers at prioritization, right? They know exactly what their highest leverage task is. That's why they do that A, B, C, D, E list, just so they can hyper prioritize, right? Or they have a rule map and all this sort of stuff. Distraction, not working because that thing keeps distracting you. Support, not working because you don't have the support or accountability partner. Feeling vulnerable, not working because it makes you feel vulnerable or exposed. Addiction, not working because you're addicted to something other than working, maybe games, maybe porn, wherever it is. Criticism, not working because you've criticized others that do the work. Denial, not working because you're in denial, refusing to see and accept the truth. Drama, not working because you're drawn to create or move drama in your personal life. This is a big one. If anyone in your team's like the drama person, where like they're in other people's business, you need to correct that straight away, because that's like a cancer in the company. If you find, and if it could be you as well, like if there's someone that's like, will talk about other colleagues or business partners behind their back and not actually directly address it in front of the person, you need to really check those people or get rid of them, because they will ruin your company. Or if they're looking at other people, like the amount of people I've got rid of because they'll come to me and be like, oh, have you seen this person? They're doing this. They're so stupid. Why would you do this with an agency? That's just retarded. And I'm like, why does it matter? Like, why that doesn't matter, right? And so like I either correct it or get rid of them. This is a really big one. This will ruin culture. Like this is probably the biggest threat to culture is drama, right? Procrastination, not working because you're putting it off till tomorrow. Self-love, not working because it makes you feel stupid and a bit of self-hatred. Self-loathing, not working because you hate yourself and don't feel as if you deserve results. Identity trap, not working because working would not be me. Routine, not working because you didn't have your latte or you didn't sleep very well. This is why I'm not a massive fan of routines. I just think, like, you know, you get these morning, like I've never met a fucking super successful entrepreneur that actually has like a morning routine that's like ice bath for an hour, then cold plunge, then do meditation, then do this. Like I've honestly, all the most successful entrepreneurs I've met, like they just get up and just work. Like you know, they might potter around for the, like, you know, Jeff Bezos in his book, like he says the first hour or two of the day he just sort of potters around and doesn't really do anything, and then he gets to work. But like none of them, like there's so much sacrifice that comes with being successful. Like you can't have like these stupidly defined morning routines, because they just hold you back from doing the actual thing. By the time it comes to do them, you're already exhausted from doing all this other shit, right? So routine's a big one, especially in productivity. Entitlement, not working because you're entitled to not, and work is beneath you. This is one that like I still face like really heavily, right? Like, you know, there's specific roles that I'm way too above to be doing this, but like I could just do it and it would like benefit me and the company in general. But I'm just like, no, I'm above that. Like there's no way, right? And that can affect you sometimes, depending on the scenario. Judging, not working because you're too busy. Judging people that are. Burnout, not working because you think you're too burned out to work. Opinions, not working because someone told you not to take a day off, etc. Uncertainty, not working because you're not sure how. And pain avoidance, not working because work hurts, right? Which is true. Example, when starting Blossom, I was responsible for cold meshing every day. And I talk about this in the Outreach Epiphany, but when starting Blossom, I was responsible for cold meshing. Every day resistance would manifest in one way, making me feel negative emotion to stop me from taking action. Every time this happened, I would open my phone and send 3 more cold messages. I built a habit to meet resistance with instant action, even at 3 a.m. Eventually resistance caved into me, right? So you can beat resistance with instant action, right? And so like I've done this recently, and I think Matt's still in you, but like recently I seen Matt like do this like press up thing on Instagram, and I was like, fitness was so far from me. I was like, I just don't want to do fitness. Like I really can't be asked. I'm too busy, blah 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 blah. And every time I would think of it, I seen Matt, and Matt in you inspired me to actually start doing some fitness shit, because I was like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And I would sit there, and every time I'd be like, oh, I need to do the work, I haven't got time to do fitness, I instantly get on the floor and start doing press ups. So I would just meet resistance head on with action. So anytime I'd have a negative thought about working out, and I'm like, oh, I'm too busy, I just need to go and do the work, I'll work out later, I'd instantly get down and just try and do like 50 push-ups straight away. And like I just met it head on with action. And now like 3 weeks later, I'm working out every day, I'm going for runs, like, and it's because I got over that initial resistance by just challenging it with instant action, right? And so like that's what I do with every aspect. If it's work, it doesn't matter, right? I always, you have to meet it with instant action, because if you don't, you're always just gonna, you know, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it another day, I'm too busy today, it doesn't matter that much, it's not as important as making money, blah 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 blah. You rationalize, right? You let all these different things we just talked about get the better of you. Now, then the next thing is force, right? This is almost to the end, but force is the next force is experience. Sorry, most business owners let their past experiences with client acquisition predict their future ones. So experience is, in my opinion, bullshit to a degree, right? Because I don't care if someone has 20 plus years of experience, because if that method and paradigm isn't up to date within the last 2 months, then they're not going to win. Because what worked 20 years ago doesn't necessarily work now. And experience often hinders more than helps in business. So a lot of the times, like it can be sometimes detrimental, which I've realized in the past year. Like when I've hired these like big players, like when I've hired, executives for my agency and they have like all this experience, sometimes it actually like hinders their performance because they might think they know best and they might think they're like the tippity top and they're actually like worse than if I was to hire someone and like teach them. Because like someone that's brand new and doesn't have this specific skill can be molded and can be trained to think a specific way, right? And think to adapt. But someone who's got like 20 years of experience and thinks they're the best, even though they might not be, like that can ruin your business because they think they're the best. And if they have such a strong belief, they can make you believe they're the best when actually it just like hinders more than helps in business, right? So experience, in my opinion, is kind of bullshit to a degree, right? And so remember, wherever experiences you've had in the past about client acquisition, about content, were probably not created out of sound practices with systems thinking and the scientific method. If you sent 150 DMs and got no responses, that doesn't mean that in your experience, cold DMs doesn't work. It means that you sent 150 DMs and they didn't get responses. And we can't afford to draw beliefs and conclusions from isolated events with poor practice, right? If you go up to speak to a girl and get rejected, and that's your first ever experience with getting rejected, and now you just assume you're really bad at speaking to girls, so you never go and speak to a girl, like that's wrong, right? Like that's not how you should act, because if you speak to enough girls, you're going to get rejected at time. Like that's with even the best people, the most charismatic, best looking guys are always going to get rejected. There's so many different reasons as to that. She could have had a bad day. She might have a boyfriend. There's all these different factors, right? But like we just put it back onto ourselves. And it's the same with client acquisition. It's the same with creating content. It's the same with everything you do in business, sales calls, like it's really important that like you do not draw beliefs and conclusions from isolated events with poor practice, right? So like you can't say if you're good at DMs until you've sent thousands of DMs and got responses. You can't say you're good at picking up girls until you've had hundreds of interactions with girls and got the end result, right? And so I can tell you how many people have joined our program and ruined their results because they were acting on past experience. The simple truth is that if your experience was able to get results, then you'd have solved the problem and wouldn't need any help. So we can't have you reliant on it to make decisions, right? So the simple truth is that if your experience was able to get you results, you'd have solved the problem already and wouldn't need any help. So we can't have you relying on it to make decisions. You should never rely on experience to make decisions. You should always rely on data. So I'm not telling you to scrap everything you've ever learned or know based on your time in business and the market. I'm just telling you not to let it close your mind to new ideas and methods that in your experience don't work, right? So examples, I had a client who had a negative experience with courses. She purchased, although slightly reluctant. She then literally dove into the first 3 videos on the program and declared the whole thing was bad based on her experience with other courses. That's just irrational, right? That's just purely irrational. But that's what like a bad bias towards experience can do, right? And so it's really important that you don't let that get a bad review. Now, the last force of irrationality is projection. So human beings are mirrors. What this means is that when looking at someone else, they'll see parts of themselves psychologically. This is called projection and is a devastating force of irrationality that screws over many people trying to acquire clients. Projection is where you take one of your qualities or beliefs and assume that other people you're dealing with share the quality or belief in question. This is a natural thing done by 99% of humans on the planet, and we assume people see the world the same way that we see it. Projection becomes an issue when you begin thinking people will act and behave a certain way just because you act and behave a certain way. Projection also creates fear and paralyzes you. This is because of fear of judgment. Many people are worried and anxious about client acquisition because they fear that people will judge them for trying to do it. The only way to have a fear of judgment is to be actively judging other people for that thing internally in your own life. For example, if I'm afraid to make a very salesy video sales letter because I might come off as like a snake oil salesman, that's because I've watched other people salesy VSLs and judged them for being snake oil salesmen, right? Your internal world reflects your external world just like a mirror. And the fastest way to eradicate a fear of judgment is to stop judging other people for the thing you're afraid of being judged for. So another thing that I want you guys to do is write down some of your judgments. So I'll drop that in the chat. Boom. So you can write out some of your judgments and then you'll be able to challenge them, right? So examples. of projection. When I was starting my YouTube channel, I assumed people wouldn't respond to flashy thumbnails and clickbait titles because I personally hate flashy thumbnails and clickbait titles. I still do, by the way. This led me to being irrational and making suboptimal decisions for the YouTube channel. The same thing happened when getting an editor. I preferred watching content without cuts and editing, but it turned out that most people don't. Silly me. Right? Another example is the judgment mirror. So a sales rep of mine was terrified to ask emotional sales questions because he thought prospects would judge him for doing it. We established this was because if he asked these questions, he'd personally feel uncomfortable answering because he understands the intention of the person asking is to make him emotional, so he will buy, and he judges them for doing this as he thinks it's manipulative. Because of this, he was projecting his own judgment onto his prospects, and this interfered with his ability to close, right? So that is the forces of irrationality. Projection is really, really important that you understand, because there's so many ways that you just project that will just mess up your decisions. So just to recap, we covered the decision sum, we covered reason and rationality, biases, we covered emotion, we covered belief, ego, resistance, experience, and finally projection. So that is what I wanted to cover on that.